want to thank God this day for the Bible journey continues. Bwana ametusaidia sana. We are getting to the book of Deutronomy. The book of Deuteronomy is the 5th book in the Bible. It is also the last book of the books of law, because the first 5 books of the Bible are known as the books of the law. Kwa Kihibirania, they are called the Torah, which simply means law. Sometimes you may also find somewhere written the Pentateuch, and sometimes also the 5 books of Moses. The reason being, all of them, the author is believed to be Moses. So the book of Deuteronomy, the author is Moses. But when you read the last chapter of the book of Deuteronomy, which is chapter 34, you realize probably somebody else wrote it, and many of the scholars believe probably it was Joshua. And I read somewhere yesterday that God is also divine, and the word is written through inspiration. So probably Moses was inspired also to write it, because God had revealed the death and the nature of his death. Well, Deuteronomy comes out very well, the name, when you say it in Swahili, Kubukubu la Torati, and also in our own vernacular language, Gushokereria Madhani. And Deuteronomy comes from the original language as the sacred law. And also another meaning of Deuteronomy is, you also get it in 1st chapter, verse 1, which simply means words in Hebrew. When you read the book of Deuteronomy, it elaborates on the responsibility of Israel as God's covenant people. And also you realize these are the last words of Moses that he spoke to the Israelites before his death. And it was in the plains of Moab, as we saw in the book of Numbers, that the last stop of the Israelites before they crossed Jordan was in the plains of Moab. When you read the book of Deuteronomy also, you realize that it is a repeat of the law to the new generation, because the old generation died as they went around wandering in the wilderness, and they were being given a repeat of these laws before they enter the promised land. In the law, in the book of Deuteronomy, they are reminded, this new generation, or they are called into memory on the many miracles that God did to their forefathers when they were coming out of Egypt, and therefore they are reminded of God's love and also God's miraculous great acts that he did for them. There is also the restatement of the covenant between God and his people in the book of Deuteronomy. You also realize that the book of Deuteronomy is very important. It's an important book because in the New Testament, you realize that it is mentioned for about 80 times. The authors referred to the book of Deuteronomy. And about 17 of the New Testament books mentions or refers to the book of Deuteronomy as it quotes the references. Jesus also severally, as you read the New Testament, quoted from the book of Deuteronomy in his teachings, and there are several of them. And as you read the New Testament, probably you can get the references. The theme of the book is restating of the law, as I had said previously, and the key verse in the book of Deuteronomy is chapter 7 and verses 9. There are other passages as you read the book of Deuteronomy that are important to make note of, and that does not mean that those others are not important, but you can make note of this. In chapter 5, verses 6 to 21, the 10 commandments are repeated again. And in chapter 6, verses 4 to 9, you realize that there is the key part of what the Jews call the confession of their faith. And when you read the history of the Jews, you realize that they recite those verses at least twice a day. It is their confession of faith, and therefore it is important to make note of them. In chapter 13, verses 1 to 5, you also read about the false prophets. So false prophets have not started with in our time. Chapter 18, verses 9 to 15, you also read about the false diviners. It is important to make note of those two chapters. Chapter 29 to chapter 30, verses 20, you also read the renewing of the covenant between God and his people. The outline of the book is number 1. We have the first address of Moses to the Israelites, which runs from chapter 1, verses 1 to chapter 4, verses 43. And in this address, Moses reviews the history of the Israelites after the Exodus, and also it has other lessons. Number 2, we have the second address of Moses, which starts from chapter 4, verses 44 to chapter 26, verses 68. In these verses, Moses reviews the commandments and also the laws that he had given. Number 3, we have the third address of Moses, which runs from chapter 27, verses 1 to chapter 30, verses 20. In these chapters, you read the consequences of disobedience and also obedience. And you realize that in disobedience there is curses, and in obedience there are blessings. Number 4, you read the fourth address of Moses, which runs from chapter 31, verses 1 to chapter 33, verses 29. And in these chapters, you'll see the arrangement for the continuation of the covenant, and also a call for commitment to the Israelites. And lastly, number 5, we are given the account of the death of Moses in chapter 34. There are many insights in the book of Deuteronomy. As I have said, that also it is quoted frequently in the New Testament, but I have written a few of the insights, and I am sure as you read it, you also add your own insights. Number 1, we serve a God of history. God is involved in our lives. Every part of our life, every day, the situations that we go through, the circumstances that we get into, God is involved. He is a God of history. Number 2, when we know that God is a God of history and is involved in our life, you realize that this gives us hope and encouragement, and this is what God was trying to do in the book of Deuteronomy, reminding the Israelites, I was involved from the beginning, I'm still involved, and forever I will be involved. Also, we learn about obedience that brings blessings, and not only obedience, but faithful obedience. Because if you obey halfway, then that is not obedience, it is disobedience. Disobedience also brings curses, and therefore we are reminded that the choices that we make have consequences. The book of Deuteronomy is also a call to love God with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our mind, and with all our strength. And lastly, the book of Deuteronomy is a call for commitment to live a godly life. I want to believe as we read the book of Deuteronomy, we shall get more insights, and also more applications into our life. May the Lord bless you. Shalom. Amen.